Hello, my name is Katrina Jervis, and I'm here with the authors Kenny Emmanuel and Shirley Garrett, and we're here to discuss their two new publications. We have The Dark Side of Light and Murder in the Lighthouse. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
And I know I introduced you already, but I would like you all to introduce yourselves as well.
Okay. I'm Shirley Garrett, and I write under Shirley B. Garrett because there's another Shirley Garrett out there.
Oh, okay.
And I'm a retired psychologist, licensed professional counselor, and I started writing full time and doing my artwork after I retired.
Mhm.
And so this Murder in the Lighthouse is the newest book that just came out in October, and it's the third book in the paranormal mystery series about Brianna Kelly, who's a born psychic who sees and hears ghosts. And her and her sidekick, Mystery Jones, try to help murder victims cross over by solving their murders. Primarily, too, because these ghosts are being naughty.
Wow. Okay. And Mr. Emmanuel, can you tell us more about your book, The Dark Side of Light?
Yep. So The Dark Side of Light, and this is volume 2, is a novelette collection. So the stories are a little longer than traditional short stories. They range from post-apocalyptic to first encounters to gene splicing to synthetic drugs. So the stories are all over the place. A lot of my ideas come from my experience as a computer engineer. I've had the ability to travel all over the country, see different places, encounter different people, and I've taken a lot of that and kind of put it into my individual stories.
That's awesome. Well, I have a few questions for you all today, and I'd like to start um, with Miss Garrett. Can you tell me about the background of Murder in the Lighthouse? Like, give us a little background, filling us in on the
Okay.
story.
Well, the book's primary characters are, of course, Brianna Kelly and Mystery Jones.
Mm.
And Brianna has this little chihuahua named Prissy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would like to say that I write all my deceased pets into my novels. So Prissy was my first dog. Well, Prissy is the one that keeps finding the dead bodies. She must have dead 3 or something. And so Brianna's mother is also psychic. It runs through her side of the family, the women. And so her mother actually gets called by her friend Bitsy to go to St. Augustine because Bitsy is living in St. Augustine and she's a ghost tour operator.
Mm.
And she can't seem to get things straightened out because they have this naughty ghost that's causing all kinds of problems. And she's getting bad reviews. So she wants some help with this. So she calls her friend Olivia, which is Brianna's mother,
Mm-hmm.
and Olivia lives in Savannah. So they meet. Mystery, Brianna, and Olivia meet down in St. Augustine, Florida.
Okay.
And Bitsy and Olivia were like best friends always, and they actually worked in St. Augustine when they were in college, which means that they were ghost tour operators, and gave tours and stuff. So they were very familiar with the area. And so they go down to try to help Bitsy out. And as usual, crazy things happen.
Wow, that is super interesting. All right, can you tell me a little bit more about the background of your story?
Which story?
Oh, that's right, because this is
Yeah,
like a
collection.
collection of stories.
So the question I typically get asked is which
Mhm.
one is my favorite?
Which is your favorite?
That has always been a challenge because I like them all,
Mhm.
not just because I wrote them. I have a ton of stories that I don't like that I wrote.
Oh.
But I finally settled on one, and I'm going to say it's going to be Vampirella.
Mm.
So, Vampirella is a story about a young woman going through college in a world where gene splicing is common. So, gene splicing is basically manipulating an individual's genes by mixing them with animals or reptiles and things like that. So, a lot of the younger folks are going around with like panther tails, cat ears, that kind of thing. They're usually minor cosmetic things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
She doesn't have it because her parents doesn't believe in it, and they can't afford the procedure.
Mm.
So she's a biology major at a university. She gets bullied a lot for not being spliced. She finally gets pushed to the edge, and she attempts to do it herself.
Oh, wow.
She ends up splicing in a very unique way, which then causes her body to reject the splice, and she kind of goes in a downward spiral of trying to keep herself alive while finding her place in the world.
Mm.
One thing that's really interesting is I love vampires, and the one question I always ask myself is, why do vampires drink blood?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where does that blood go? Right? They don't go to the bathroom or anything, right?
That's so true. Yeah.
So what I did with this character is say, hey, she drinks blood, but it's really to cycle out her white blood cell count so that she can fight the splice that's in her body.
Oh.
That is
So
so
I kind of took
interesting.
that typical blood that vampires kind of go into or consume, and actually gave it a purpose other than the fantasy of giving them power, things like that.
Now, can you tell me about the whole gene splicing element? Is this something that you created on your own, or did you draw inspiration from something else?
Gene splicing is a common, I guess we'll call them trope
Mm-hmm.
among future science fiction.
Okay.
There's a lot of series that tackle gene splicing. It's not new necessarily. I know in the real world, doctors are kind of looking at it to like a lizard regenerative capabilities to try and allow people to regenerate limbs and things like that.
This reminds me of Spider-Man.
Yes, that's a good one.
Okay.
So, and Spider-Man is one of my favorite characters, so I may have drawn a little bit, subconsciously drawn some inspiration from that movie.
That's awesome. And let's go back to Murder in the Lighthouse. Can you tell me why you chose St. Augustine, Florida for this particular location?
I went on vacation,
Oh, okay.
and we went down in the winter to get away from the cold, and I was fascinated by that place. It's so old. So many things are so old. It's the oldest continuously, you know, occupied city in the United
Oh,
States.
that's
And
amazing.
so they have the original, oldest schoolhouse there
Mhm.
that has survived because it's made of cedar, and it just all these things. And it the funny thing about it is
Mm.
you're going along and you're thinking, oh, there's a pirate museum. Oh, that's gonna be, kind of crappy. But I went in and I was amazed at this place. If you go to St. Augustine, go to the Pirate Museum. It had a history of every pirate there ever was. I mean, they even had actual treasures there in that museum that had been found off of pirate ships. Can you imagine? They had a great security system. And the food was amazing. And one of the places I wrote into my book, for example, was Mimi's Crepes. So we had gone up to Seine and went to Huntsville, where we had crepes in France that were just beyond amazing. And I can tell you, Mimi's Crepes are as good as those. And so you'll find that in the book. So when you go to St. Augustine, or even if you live in St. Augustine, you're going to recognize all these places the same way I do with the two previous books in this series, Murder in the Churchyard and Murder in the Cemetery, which take place in Huntsville. You will go to Maple Hill Cemetery, and you will go to restaurants here in this area and different places. So it's like putting you there.
Yeah.
So my two things I look to do is to really sink you into that environment
Mhm.
to where you feel like you're really there and you recognize places if you are.
Mhm.
And the other is to basically make my characters as psychologically accurate as possible.
I like that. That sounds awesome.
It's fun.
There is something like very magical and eerie about older locations. I can remember traveling to DC. When you're in an historical place, you kind of get that magic of being
Oh,
in the past.
yes.
So I can understand what you're coming from with the whole St. Augustine
Uh-huh.
aspect. That's
I felt that
awesome.
same way about DC.
Yes, DC is magical.
And if you haven't read one of her books yet, she does a wonderful job with food spread and describing the food. You finish a chapter and you're just like, I'm ready to go have a feast.
I'm hungry.
And it's
Yeah.
always like different because I think Olivia cooks.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mystery cooks sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
there's just like, she describes so many different dishes on the table. And then you're just like, wow.
Mystery the ghost, he cooks.
No, Mystery Jones is the friend who can't see or hear ghosts, but she
Oh.
loves the paranormal and she get anything to see and hear ghosts. And her mother is Lucille, and Lucille doesn't want her involved in anything paranormal because she's a very strict Southern Baptist. But that woman can cook soul food like you have never eaten.
I love it. I love it. Awesome. Okay, so let's see. I want to know something about your stories, Mr. Emmanuel. Why do only a few of your stories continue from volume 1 into now volume 2?
So when I started the series, I wasn't sure how many volumes I was going to make. And I typically write much longer pieces, but I also wanted to do short stories. My writers group that I'm a part of challenged me to finish short stories. Some of the stories did end up being too big for one volume, so I continued them in other volumes. At the same time, they're somewhat episodic, so that each one kind of stands alone, even though it continues in the next one. And then I wanted to do something unique that goes along with my writing style. So, for example, Volume 1 and Volume 2 both have a story called Vanguard, but they are not related at all as far as characters in the world. They're just about leading the other short stories, the book in general, and about someone or some group trying to get from one place to another. Right. As I went and continued writing the stories, and then I was like, hey, well, this story kind of is part of a bigger world. And so I'm slowly developing that world across the stories.
Okay.
Another story was more like individual. They stand alone by themselves 100%, but they all have the same characters and all the things. So I kind of wanted each story to progress differently from one volume to another.
Now, will any of the individual stories from the Dark Side of the Light eventually branch off into their own novels?
I don't know. I've been asked that. There's been a couple requests for some of the stories to have their own novels. It's always my opinion that they're strong because they're short, and that when you start to go out to the bigger world, they kind of lose a little bit of that's what makes them special. We're focused on this one character, this one situation, and it's beautiful in how it develops. If I go to a novel length, then I've got to make the world bigger. I've got to go to other places and things like that. So I'm exploring it. I guess my pseudo way of kind of doing that is by having, some of the stories continue. Right now, my plan is for 4 volumes.
Okay.
And one of the stories called Eden is the one that's going to continue through the only one that'll continue through all 4 volumes.
Awesome. Thank you.
He has a harder time, really, than I do. Because when you're talking about world building, every author has world building. But my world building means going to St. Augustine or actually going to wherever I'm going in Huntsville and getting all the details to build the world that's already there for the reader. Kenny has to create a whole world. And with that world, he has to create all the rules of that world.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit, I think, more complicated.
Yeah, so like when I talked about Vampirella, it's kind of based in the real world in the future, but it's gene splicing.
Right.
So I had to develop the medical facility that handles it, all the laws and legal limits to it. What a society would view it, because it has to be a part of the world, right? I went to a seminar once, and one of the speakers, I can't remember their name, said if you can take out that science fiction element and the story still works, then it's not necessarily science fiction. Right. So it's very hard to pull some of those science fiction elements out of my story without the story breaking down. Right.
Okay.
Some of them take place in space, and so again, I have to like she said, come up with the rules and everything, the back history,
Mhm.
like how do they get the space, why are they there, what is their plan going forward. And some of those I will work on developing into larger pieces, but it's a challenge, but I love it.
In my books, I'm the one that has to create the rules for ghostum.
Mhm.
And so, what are the rules of what the ghosts do or can't do in my book series? So, that's about the most I have to create on world building that's not actually reality.
Now I'm curious, as far as world building is concerned, for your Murder in the Lighthouse series, do you have like something that you refer to, or do you have everything about the world building memorized?
Well, I tried to stick to the traditions
Mhm.
of world building for ghostum. I
Okay.
call it ghostum.
Mhm.
And it's an interesting thing because ghosts don't age.
Right.
So my ghosts stay the same. But I create things that make it my world.
Mm.
For example, I describe that when a ghost walks through something or you walk through a ghost, it kind of steals some of their energy.
Mm.
And so, therefore, they have to recharge, and how they recharge is off people's emotions.
Mm.
But I also came up with an idea from my psychological background. Okay, you have this ghost. This ghost was just murdered.
Mhm.
So why can't that ghost just tell you who did it?
That's true.
Okay, well, it's because he has post-death amnesia.
Mm.
So
I like that. I like that. Because a lot of times we're left with these questions as to, well, why can't they just figure out the murder right then and there? I like that. That's awesome. Okay, so going back to world building, um, I would like to know if the characters from the dark side of the light, do they exist within the same universe, or are you building separate worlds for each one of those stories?
Each one is a completely separate world,
That is amazing.
it is.
completely different, completely, the technology is different, the time period is different, everything is very different. And I
Makes
think one of
sense.
my buddies described it as one author, well, one book, 9 authors,
I think of it as
Mm.
world hopping.
or world hopping. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah. So they're all just very different. Now, one of the stories is kind of based in reality,
Mhm.
and it was kind of like my trolling my writers group a little bit,
Mhm.
because I put myself in it. And so over the years, the writers have noticed, as I read to them, they're like, hey, you tend to have characters that are on a journey to do this, or your stories tend to have this element in it. One of the keywords from another person's story, they're like, hey, that sounds like a character name Kenny would use.
Mhm.
So I took all of that and I wrote a story where the world, everyone in the world is having the same dream,
Mhm.
and the dreams are based off of my books.
Oh my goodness.
And so the challenge is he gets tasked by the President of the United States
Mm.
to help figure out why the dreams are happening and why they exist. And so it's just kind of a way for me to throw in all those comments that I've gotten over the years. And I think Shirley pointed out that I say accept a lot.
Mhm.
So I made sure the main character said accept a lot in the story.
I love
So
it.
just little things like that,
That's a
kind of,
cool Easter egg. Yeah.
thanks to the writers group, here's a story for you guys.
That's awesome. Okay, so we discussed your character's love for cooking as one of your favorite things. But can you tell me more about your favorite things about your characters?
Well, one of my favorite characters in that book is actually not the main character,
Mm.
and it's Mystery Jones.
Mhm.
Because Mystery Jones she has this enormous sense of humor,
Mhm.
and she has these quick comebacks. And the way these two characters play back and forth off of each other is just, I find it interesting
Mhm.
because they really do love each other, but they will go back and forth at other sometimes, and it's just hilarious. And then, there are other characters in the book, they're secondary, like Mr. Kraft. He's next door.
Yeah.
And he has an antiques business. And so Mystery has her shop, and then Brianna has her shop, and Mr. Kraft is on the other side of Mystery.
Mhm.
And he loves these women. and they love him, but he's a piece of work because it's a strip mall, and they're only allowed 2 parking spaces per shop.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this restaurant at the end of the place that just gobbles up the parking places.
Mm-hmm.
So he got mad. He put up 2 signs in front of his 2 parking spaces saying, "Okay, if you're not a customer of my shop, we will tow you."
Mm-hmm.
And so at noon, he's out the door with his cane, standing there. If you don't move that car, I'm going to, tow it. And teenage boys are going, yeah, and they'll walk off, and he's calling the tow company.
Hey, I
It's
like
one
it. I
thing
can
I'll
see it.
say.
I can feel
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
It's one thing I'll say about her story is it's like watching a TV show.
Yes.
And so you'll get to a certain chapter where Mystery and Brianna are in the shop. They're looking out the window at the drama going on out there. And then, sometimes the drama comes inside and they, pretend like they weren't paying attention.
No, we weren't looking at
So,
that. No, we didn't see any of that.
I love it. Can you tell us more about Mystery's name? How did Mystery Jones get her name?
Well, actually, that is revealed in the book.
Oh, it's a secret. I love that.
It's revealed in the book.
Okay. So that means you have to read the book.
Right. Well, I will say that Mystery's mother and father, who were both college professors, were having difficulty having a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the lead up to the story. But yes, in every book, just so the new people can catch up, because when you're in a series, you kind of have to fill in, even though they stand separately. Just on why in the world did she get the name Mystery?
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So these 2 books look incredible. The cover art is just gorgeous. Can you tell us more about the artists who, took the time to create these beautiful pieces for you all?
If you're starting with me, all right, I mentioned that I am also an artist. I do watercolors and acrylics and oil painting. Well, one of the watercolor classes I'm in, the instructor's name is Dan Pritchett, and Dan is just such a sweetheart. He has a very talented wife, Margie, who also does illustrations for children's books. And I told Dan that I had written Murder in the Churchyard and that I was going to have to paint a painting of this historical church because I like to put historical things in a series. And he said, "Oh, I think I did a plein air of that a couple years ago." So he pulls out his book and he's flipping through and there it is. Well, each type of book, I think Kenny agrees with me on this, each type of book has a different type of cover art. And that was the perfect type of cover art for this series of books. And so I said, that's it. And so I immediately paid him for the rights to it, and we wrote up a contract. And he is basically the one who did the cover art for all 3 of the books in the series, and he will do the cover art for future books in the series. Because I think Dan is a very talented artist with watercolor.
Gorgeous. It's really gorgeous. And what about you, Mr. Garrett?
So my artist, his name is Doug Duarte. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. He lives overseas, and so I found him through a website called ArtStation, which is basically a place where artists can showcase their work and you can request commissions from them. Like Shirley said, every book has a type that you're looking for. So I spent hours and hours going through ArtStation, looking through artists' work and things, and his artwork was one that stood out to me the most. It wasn't this one, obviously, but it was, some other world that he had drawn and colored and all that stuff. I said, this is the one I want. And so I sent him an email. I kind of sent him a short synopsis of what the stories were like. And he immediately loved them. He was like, dude, these are very unique stories that you're writing. I want to do your cover. This cover, just like the last one, is all about reflection. So the last one was a woman stepping in a puddle of water. And so you see her reflection in the water. This one, he's touching a glass of a building, and you can see his reflection in the glass. And again, that kind of ties into the dark side of light theme. Everybody's kind of looking in the mirror at an alternate world, an alternate version of themselves. It'll be a challenge for the next couple of books to come up with something, a reflection that's different.
Yeah.
That hasn't been used yet. But yeah, we went through many iterations that kind of describe what I was looking for. What I try to do is the cover art, every piece of it has something that's related to a story.
Mm-hmm.
So the main character, his face, is actually one of the characters in the book.
Okay.
His clothing is for a different character in the book.
Mm-hmm.
The bracelet he has on is for yet a different character.
Mm-hmm.
That creature in the background was from the story I was telling you that I put myself in.
Mm-hmm.
And then the buildings and all that are part of the Vanguard story. So each element in the cover is actually represented in the book.
That's awesome.
And it comes together so well.
It really does.
Yeah, it's a challenge because I kind of write down all the things I want, and then I got to make it feel natural, naturally incorporated into the cover.
I really
Understand.
appreciate that even though it's a stylized drawing of a person, it looks like a real person.
Mhm.
It's like someone you could see if you went outside. That's really cool.
Yeah, and he does a really good job with that.
He really does.
He does beautiful work.
Now, Ms. Garrett, can you tell us what's next? I know we're just releasing this lovely book here, but are you going to be continuing this series?
Well, I'm a weird writer. I
Mhm.
know some people start on one book and go all the way through, but I usually have 3 or 4 books going at once.
Mhm.
And when I write for an hour or so and I feel like I'm kind of need to take a break from that, I just pop over to a different book.
Mhm.
So, what I have coming up
Mhm.
is I am doing a book that's going to be titled Snippets. It'll be Snippets from My Life.
Mhm.
And it's going to be a volume of short stories, of true short stories
Awesome.
from my life that are humorous or frightening or somehow or another very significant to me. And I was encouraged to do this by Kenny Short Stories. And then the other, I'm doing a 4th one on this one.
Mhm.
And the 4th one is going to take place in Savannah, Georgia.
Okay.
So I have been to Savannah, Georgia, but my husband and I are planning a trip to go back to Savannah, Georgia, so I can get all the specifics in place and get photographs of all the houses that I'm going to put in and the restaurants and all this stuff. And so that's going to be the 4th one in this one. I'm also working on a 4th one in the Hot Flash Diva series.
Okay.
If I don't get a 4th one out in the Hot Flash Diva series, somebody's going to get me. I can tell you that. I keep getting asked, where's the next one? Where's the next one?
Mhm.
And so these books about Phoenix O'Leary and her 3 diva friends who have been friends since college, who every time they get together, crazy things happen,
Mhm.
are like gobbled up sometimes in a night. So I have to get busy on that one. So I've started that one. And then I've started the 4th one in the Deadly series, the Deadly Compulsion, Deadly Lessons, Deadly Obsession. And this one, the main character, Charlie Stone, who's a female psychologist, who's also a profiler
Mhm.
for the FBI. And now she has her own practice and part-time profiles for the Huntsville Police Department.
Mm.
So this one takes place in Huntsville. And she has decided to write a crime thriller.
Mm.
And she is getting this guy that's sending her creepy, creepy, creepy emails.
Mm.
And so she's being stalked by this guy. And my mode of operation with that series is, because you're about serial killers,
Mhm.
so this isn't for everyone. So there's a trigger warning there. It's about serial killers.
Mhm.
So she has a chapter, and then the serial killer has a chapter, and
Okay.
it alternates. So I literally put you in the mind of the serial killer,
Mm.
and then I have to go take a shower afterwards.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's intense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll be interesting.
Now, Mr. Emmanuel, can you tell us what's next for your stories?
I've got about 3 on the table right now.
See, you do
So,
too.
yeah, just like you, I start writing one, and if I kind of get writer's block a little bit, then I'll jump to another. So the first book I wrote is called The Path of Time.
Mhm.
It's a science fiction time travel story.
Mhm.
Word count wise, it's about half the size of these books. I had planned to write a second one, and I stopped and thought, well, why don't I just combine them into one book?
Mm.
And I may just call it, The Path of Time Extended Edition. So it'll have the original one and then the complete second half, and it'll be that size, cover, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking at that one. That one I'm actually didn't realize, because I forget sometimes, that I had written 75% of it. So that one was close to being finished.
Oh, you're almost done.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was like, I know I wrote some of this, and I went and I found a lot of it, and I was like, oh, I should probably just finish this one. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, I've got 2 more of the Dark Side of Light books that I want to finish. I'm already getting ideas for 3 of the stories. 2 of them continued from this one, and 1 new, to write those. Some of the continued stories will end, and others will continue onward. The last one is the most challenging, and I realized I'd written about 40% of it, but it's an urban fantasy one, which completely detracts from what I've been writing as science fiction. So I started rewriting that one, because again, the characters' voices just called out to me. They were like, hey, write my story. And so I started writing that one a little bit too. So as time goes on, one of them will kind of jump ahead of the others, and I'll end up finishing it.
Yeah.
I just don't know which one right now. So,
Do you have books wake you up in the middle of the night that you have to go do something about them?
yes, so I actually have a notepad on my dresser or on my nightstand, so that when I do get it, I won't go to sleep otherwise. It'll just I'll keep thinking of it. So I'll get up and I'll just write it all down, and then I'm out.
I do the same thing. But I had this one, and it was strange because I had like 4 books going, and it's like, I don't need another book right now. And I went back to sleep. And it kept waking me up every night. So I finally got up, wrote the first chapter, and I haven't gone anywhere with it yet, past the first chapter. But finally, it quit waking me up.
You got the story out.
Yeah, I got the
Or
story
that part of
started.
it,
Yeah, I know where it's going, but I kept the first chapter, so.
So now that we know about your incredible stories, and I'm excited to read them, where can we find The Dark Side of Light and Murder in the Lighthouse?
Well, all my books are available on Amazon in both ebooks and paperbacks. And I kind of have this little charitable thing going right now. I'm a member of the Senior Center on Drake Avenue, and they have these spectacular things going on there, including my watercolor class, and I'm teaching an oil painting class there. But they have a gift shop, and it's open to the public. They have some amazing things that people have made there. And so I keep autographed copies of that stock there. And if you buy it from there, then the adult daycare center there at the senior center gets a donation off of it.
Okay, that's awesome. And you said the Senior Center on Drake?
Uh-huh.
Okay, awesome. And can you tell us more about where we can find The Dark Side of Light?
All of my books are also available on Amazon, self-published. The Dark Side of Life series has an ebook, a paperback, and a hardcover. The Path of Time is just paperback and ebook. But I usually direct people to KennyEmmanuel.com. You can find all the books on there, or links to all the books on there. And then they can follow my Facebook page. That's where I post most updates. And I just recently started an Instagram account to also put pictures of my journey and places I go that kind of inspire these stories and share them with folks.
Yeah, it's really funny when we do our business writers lunch. Here we all are ordering our food and talking about the things of the business of writing. And we have our books next to our food and taking. And I will take copies of my book with me when I go on vacations and take pictures of myself holding the book and at certain locations. So
I love that.
And I also have a website, and it's ShirleyBGarrett.com.
Shirley B. Garrett, because there's another Shirley Garrett author.
Oh, it gets weirder than that. I met her at the International Speakers Association. So she's blonde. I have a doctorate in psychology. She has a doctorate in education. So we're both Dr. Garretts. She has written 1 book, and it's a basic nonfiction. And we're both speakers. So if you need someone to speak at your book club, I'm your lady. I love book clubs.
Oh, that's crazy. Two
It's
Dr. Garrett.
Two Dr. Garrett.
Two Dr. But she has a different middle initial. So every once in a while, I get this email saying, and they'll say, "Oh, Shirley, I saw your photo on such and such. I am so glad you cut your hair. It looks so much better now." And I'm going, "You have the wrong."
Oh my goodness. I'm just so grateful that you all sat down and took the time to tell me more about these amazing stories. Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel. Thank you so much, Ms. Garrett. And I cannot wait to dive into these stories myself.
Thank you
That's
for
right.
being here.
Thanks for having us.
No problem. Thank you so much.